right, everyone, we're here for another review with Austin Amestoy and Spencer Whitaker. I think the last time we did this was for Batman v Superman. Now, we have had a few people ask for a review of Justice League, but we have not got to it. We are very busy people, but we figured we would review this. Spencer and I have seen this twice now, and Austin only once.
Yeah, just the one time.
Yeah, and I was wondering if we could just start it out talking about what we thought about the movie before we went into it, or what we were kind of expecting. We had spent like the last 2 years watching Robert Pattinson movies, which, I mean, that dude went from being Edward to a prisoner on a spaceship in High Life, to like being a prince for France in The King, and then the Batman, which was like really surprising for all of us.
And whatever happened in Good Time, which I have not seen.
We watched Good Time.
Good Time. That's, I mean, just a different level. There's bleach hair Pattinson right there.
Well, and then Uncut Gems by the same director.
Oh, yeah, the Safdie brothers.
I mean, I was very excited for this, and when it was announced that he was going to be Batman, that's kind of what prompted me to watch all of those movies. So what did you guys expect going into it?
Well, I probably should have expected it based off of the roles Pattinson had been playing, but he was playing some really weird roles. Like, he was doing some really interesting, unusual stuff. And so, like, I should have probably forecast that his, like, Bruce Wayne and Batman would be equally, like, weird and kind of aloof, you know?
Well, Pattinson's a weird guy in general.
Yeah.
Like even in the interviews, he's just, so I actually think that his role in The King, it's so awkward and weird, but like, honestly, that's more like him than any of the other characters he plays. It's actually really funny. But yeah, what did you think? I only watched the teaser for this movie. I didn't actually go in with much expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the teaser when it first came out, and then I guess trailers as they came out. But I try not to pay too much attention to the trailers. I like having it be surprising. So Pattinson plays a lot of supporting roles in a lot of movies that I am very fond of. You know, The Lost City of Z. I know it's a lot of people don't like that movie, but that's one of my favorites. That and then The King and Good Time and all those movies. And it's a very unique way that he seems to approach all the roles. And so I was really interested to see how he, coming from such a wide eclectic background, last time he was in a mainstream thing, was probably, I guess King's kind of mainstream, but more like Twilight was like, his real like mainstream role. And I think, probably his weakest role, but those movies are just kind of terrible to begin with. But to come from those kinds of weird movies, especially movies like High Life and Good Time, into a very conventional role and into a character that's already been established. Yeah. So he can have his own take on it, but it's like he can't, change that accent that much. He can't change, really the backstory, this and that. It has to be like within these parameters. So it was really interesting to see how he came into that role.
This was his first time doing franchise work since Twilight. Yeah. Right. Like that. And this was a movie that he's been in. This is the most money he's made as an actor in a movie, the movie that he's in since Twilight, right? Like Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 or whatever made 100-some million in the opening weekend. And of course, Batman did really well as well. But all the movies in between that were indie films primarily that were not big budget at all. It's a good tactic on Pattinson's part and the part of his agent to like distance himself from Twilight and prove himself as an actor because, all of the Batman primarily to take on the role before were known actors, right? Like we've never really had an off the cuff Batman who doesn't come from like a really pronounced acting background. So I think it was really smart. Like he was setting himself up to return to franchise work because that's where the money is, of course. So this is a paycheck movie for him, but it's the best of both worlds because a lot of actors have their paycheck movie where they just make a lot of money, but they're just kind of phoning it in. But this is an opportunity for him to make a lot of money and also draw on all of the acting experience that he's built through, the last decade.
And there is a lot of talk about how this movie kind of like redeemed himself from the Twilight series. And I do think that like, I don't think that anyone who is going to watch this movie has seen Good Time or, like High Life. Like I think that it'll attract a lot of people who probably the last time they watched Pattinson on screen may have been the Twilight movies, which is pretty wild to think about.
Well, that's why the internet discourse was just like, the internet was on fire when Pattinson was announced as Batman. So they're like, oh, the sparkling vampire guy is gonna be.
It's either that or Cedric
Batman.
Diggory. Like those are the only
yeah, right.
From.
Which that's why it was so great. I loved our little. Well, I got tired of Robert Pattinson movies eventually because they're all they're. I mean, he's great in all of them, but like the movies he's in are just like. God, they're just like downers, man. Like 90% of the time, I mean, like they're great. Okay, they're really good, but also like, I don't know.
I genuinely like. I actually think he's become one of my favorite actors, which is wild to say.
He is really. I mean, he's a transformational actor, right? Like some people, he's a character actor, and like I'm willing to go out on a limb and say he is because like a lot of actors are typecast for roles, but Pattinson has an amazing ability to disappear into a role, and that more than like a lot of things I think is like a testament to his performance in the Batman is he really disappears into the character. Like I even having seen all those Robert Pattinson movies, do not see Robert Pattinson when I watch that movie. Like,
I think there's an interesting thing too, because I think when you do talk about like a transformative actor, a character actor, I think when people gets all the attention, someone like Christian Bale, where they go through like those bodily transformations, he bulks up for the Dark Knight, he cuts down for The Machinist or whatever that one was. And then, he gets fat for Vice, like, all those things. Whereas like, people get, I mean, he's a Dick Cheney, like, he does that and that's the character. And then, you get the transfer, you get the before and after photos on and they go viral on Facebook or whatever. But like someone like Pattinson, I think there's a psychological transformation that, you kind of adopt for each character. And I think that's just, A, it's just as impressive. And B, I think it's just as intriguing as, the actions of the actor, the steps that they take on the physical role, like a Christian Bale was, but it's just not as quite, I don't think it's quite as like appreciated, in the world as.
Yeah. Well, I know that Pattinson himself, like he actually referred to a lot of comics. I think he said that he referred to the year 2 comics to inspire like who this Batman was. And I mean, you can tell that he was really looking into the psychology of it. And I mean, it goes to like a lot of his acting in this movie is with his eyes. Yeah. Like I'm specifically thinking of the scene when he first interacts with the Riddler in Arkham, and like he's standing in the shadows, and I don't think that the Riddler can see him at this point, but like there's the question of whether or not the Riddler knows that he's Bruce Wayne, right? And his eyes at that moment are like he's terrified, and you can really tell. And well, so I've seen this movie twice now. The first time I kind of wasn't in a serious mindset, and I decided to give it a more charitable viewing in the second time, and I appreciated it a lot more because I thought that he was very stiff, but then I paid more attention to the acting and his eyes, and I noticed how intentional that was, especially when I learned how he approached this role.
Well, I will say, I mean, to your point about stiffness, like I don't think he's like perfect. I don't think he's perfect in the movie. I think his Batman is like borderline perfect, but I was less than inspired by his Bruce Wayne. To be fair, they don't give his Bruce Wayne very much to do in the movie.
Well, and I would say, I think that's a very intriguing point if you think about it, because there is very little Bruce Wayne to him. And, and this is, it's more of a take because they talked about, and the director, Matt Reeves, talked a lot about it being inspired by Kurt Cobain's relationship with fame and his like reclusive nature. And so this movie, we only see Bruce Wayne 3 or 4 times, right? But I don't think that Bruce Wayne exists. Like, I really don't think there's a Bruce Wayne side yet. I think he hasn't developed, that charismatic side that like Christian Bale has. And I think because if you go back to the very beginning scene, when you first see him as Bruce Wayne and Alfred comes in and they're talking about his family legacy, he talks about this being his family legacy. He's not continuing the philanthropy. He's not continuing, the big, face of the media, the face of the city kind of deal. I don't think, I don't even know how many times he's stepped out of that tower as Bruce Wayne in the last 20 years. And so for him, when he goes to the funeral and he's essentially Batman, he's acting as Batman. He's looking this way and that. He's not shaking hands and, kissing up to senators and to politicians or other wealthy people, or talking to, the home. I mean, his orphanage is in shambles. Like, it's not, he hasn't kept up with that side of the work at all. And so I really don't think there is, or at least I don't think that this Batman has developed a Bruce Wayne persona yet. It's not an alter ego. It's just like a name that he also has. Like,
well, that's kind of why I like the movie on the second viewing, because the first time I think I was bothered by the fact that there was less Bruce Wayne than Batman. But if the more I leaned into the fact that this was his second year as Batman, I liked it a lot more. And they explicitly say that this is a theme of kind of unmasking Batman, and like the entire arc of Batman throughout the movie is like becoming this guy who is just like a masked figure who wants to inspire fear into criminals, to like being a symbol that stands up for more than that. And I think in that interaction with Paul Dano in Arkham, he explicitly says they want to unmask you, but I know, like you do, that you are Batman. Like that the mask is
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly what you're getting at. That like that is kind of the main theme in the movie.
Yeah, so to kind of get back to the basics of this movie. So this is a movie, obviously it came out this year. It's directed by Matt Reeves, who also directed Cloverfield in 2008, Let Me In 2010, which is a remake of the Swedish film, I believe, as well as Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes, which I believe he either wrote or co-wrote both of those as well. Fun fact, he's the only filmmaker besides Tim Burton to have directed both the Planet of the Apes film and a Batman film. So,
That's
you know,
weird.
he's got really upper echelon there.
That's weird.
This movie was shot by cinematographer Greg Fraser, an Australian cinematographer who did Bright Star, Let Me In with Matt Reeves, Zero Dark 30, Rogue One, Lion, Vice, episodes of The Mandalorian, and he most recently did Dune, the 2021 sci-fi thriller.
Which he's up for an Oscar nomination in Best Visual Effects right now.
For sure.
Or not visual effects, but for cinematography, at least at the time of this recording.
And I think he's doing the second Dune Part 2 or Dune 2, whatever they're
I
calling
think
it.
so.
I think he signed
Yeah.
on for that. And the top cast members, we've got Batman and Bruce Wayne is performed by Robert Pattinson. The Riddler is Paul Dano. Catwoman and Selena Kyle are Zoe Kravitz. Lieutenant James Gordon, who interestingly enough in this movie started out not as Commissioner Gordon.
I actually wanted to mention that really quick. There's another aspect to that. So I don't know if he actually becomes commissioner in the movie. I think you said you think he does by the end, like,
Or at least he's acting commissioner.
Yeah, he's an acting commissioner. But what another person who was killed in this movie. So it's first the mayor, I think, and then the commissioner, and then the DA.
Yeah, Coulson.
Who becomes DA.
Harvey Dent.
Leaves an election open.
Oh,
I think Harvey Dent might be introduced.
yeah.
And
That
we
wouldn't
have
surprise me.
Colin Farrell, incredible as the Penguin and Oz. Alfred was Andy Serkis in this film. We had kind of because the Falcone was in the Nolan trilogy as well, right? But they played
he was in Batman Begins, and I think he was Falcone in that movie and Falcone in this one. So there seems to not be a decisiveness in pronunciation.
And that was John Turturro who did that, and then our unseen Arkham prisoner or Arkham inmate is Barry Keoghan. And if I butcher that pronunciation, it's because Google doesn't know how to pronounce it either. So
I'm going with Keoghan.
Keoghan. Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll go with that. So those are the specs. It was shot over a couple of years, and I think it was originally supposed to be released earlier and then delayed by the pandemic. I think so.
Yeah, I think it was delayed maybe once, but it wasn't delayed too much because production started right around the time that the pandemic, they weren't very far into things when the pandemic came down. So they did a lot of like shooting and production during the pandemic as well. So it wasn't as impacted as like other movies were, or like friggin' Top Gun Maverick, which is like never going to come out.
Yeah.
I'm going to see trailers for it.
I've seen trailers of it for the last 3 years. Like, it's like there's an era of my life that's defined by seeing, a trailer of it every 6 months. Like,
classic.
Well, and what's crazy is that this movie, you can't tell that there were any disruptions, because I know that like Pattinson got COVID on the set, and they had to take a break, and you really can't tell. I mean, there's never really like a technical flaw, I don't think, other than maybe like the pacing that we could get into later.
Well, this is one of the first, but to the COVID thing, this is one of the first like blockbuster movies that has used the technology that they developed on The Mandalorian, the volume they call it in Disney, but it's not proprietary. So, different studios have their own versions of it now, but it's basically like a panoramic set of LED panels that can project any image on the back to sort of place the actor in the scene, which of course that image is then used they don't just take what's in the camera with like that image or whatever. They like, put the actual computer generated effect behind them in post, but it allows for lighting and a sense of presence and place in a way that a green screen can't
interact with it as well. Some of those Marvel movies where everything's blue and like this giant,
yeah, exactly. So that was a technique that actually really aided them through the pandemic, because I mean, the stuff that's shot sort of in that sort of abandoned structure parking garage where the bat signal is, that where it's sort of shot, I think either at sunset or at dawn. There's a couple of scenes with like Zoe Kravitz and Pattinson there, and Jeffrey Wright as well. That was all done on the volume, like the projection of Gotham behind them
too. Yeah.
So yeah,
and I was listening to an interview with Greg Fraser, who did those Mandalorian episodes, and he also shot Rogue One, which is where like kind of the inception of that idea started to come. He said there was a few scenes in there that had kind of that same idea that was then expanded on by Lucasfilm and them in the Mandalorian. So that was really interesting cool. As well. So going back to, and you were talking earlier, you were watching this video of the clips of all like the introductory scenes for each of these films. And so what did you guys think of that first shot, that POV shot with the breathing? You think it might be the Batman, it might be who are you looking at? And then you find out, obviously that it's the Riddler observing the mayor, I forgot mayor's name, Mitchell or something like that. And then
Don Mitchell, I think. It was a nice bait and switch because, I figured we weren't going to get a Martha and
another death scene.
I'm happy that we didn't.
Yes, like I told you guys, I've told you guys off camera before, but we better never get it again, because Snyder did it best in Batman v Superman. It's never going to be done better than that. So personally, but it was a nice bait and switch because they show that, someone's peeping through the window, but there's a kid in there with his parents. And it's Halloween, they're about to go out. And so you almost, for a moment, I thought, I was like, oh man, maybe that is like Bruce's parents and we're going to like see how they died. But then of course, like you said, we find out that it's the Riddler, which I thought was a great way to start the movie, kind of play with the audience's expectations a little bit.
Well, what's cool about that too is because the first time I was watching it, I was watching it with a friend from Billings, and he whispered to me, he's like, that's Bruce. And I'm like, they better not, like the kid. But then you're also wondering if like the person looking at them is Batman, which is cool because then they bring that back when he's kind of being a voyeur and spying on. So yeah. And because then it's his lens. He's looking at her through the telescope or whatever he's using. But binoculars. Yeah. And he
big old telescope.
And then that, like, there's also the reveal there of the technology that he uses, which I don't think has ever been used in a Batman before, like the eyepiece.
Oh, the contact lens?
I think it's amazing. But I like that they kind of use that parallel very early because you start to see the theme they're playing with, that like Batman actually is kind of a reflection of the Riddler and he's assisting him the whole time. So the first opening shot where we're looking through, or we're looking at the mayor through the Riddler's eyes, is later brought up and referred to through Batman's eyes, which I thought was really cool.
I think one of the cool things that they do in this film is they hide a lot of things in plain sight, both in the way that the shots are stitched together, as well as, through the use of like shallow focus and stuff. But in that first scene, you see you're looking through the camera, angle, or in the binoculars, you're peeking in. And the next shot after that is a high angle shot looking down through a cracked skylight, which he saw that he pans through, the kid goes to the middle of the room, and you can see him look at the skylight. So he's like, some reconnaissance on there.
Right.
And then you see that cracked skylight, but it's open. But at least the first time I watched it, I thought it was just because to get some fresh air, or like it's just naturally open, or blah, 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 this and that. And it kind of is a way to just kind of frame, it's a nice, just a pleasant looking shot to frame the mayor. You cut into the mayor, but that's a hint, because that had been opened. And I don't know, maybe I'm just dumb and didn't catch it the first time, but like it had been opening there. But then, on the second watch too, you can see the Riddler behind him early on. You can see a little bit of his arm peeking out behind early on.
Really?
And the coolest thing that I think they do is they give us POV shots before we even know that they're POV shots. So there's several shots. There's two shots. There's one behind the mayor as he's watching the TV, and it's behind the mayor, and it's just a straight up shot. But what it really is a POV shot of the Riddler standing there, looking at the mayor and the TV. And they also have one that's even further, which is essentially an over the shoulder shot of, you see his shoulder. And on the second watch, you can see that. as he's looking at the mayor.
Wow.
And then, the mayor leaves, and then you have that with the light flashes on it,
Yeah.
and, he comes out and he kills him and this and that. And I just thought that POV was really cool. And they do the same thing with, because the point of view shots are an easy way to like just put the audience right in the character's shoes. And usually it's in eyes, you get all like the films where like they get knocked out and they're like open, and you kind of get the rings of like the eyelids flaring open. But in this movie, they do an interesting way, I think, literally putting us in the space of the character. So when we first see Batman coming into the crime scene at the apartment, the shot is an eye level shot, essentially a tracking shot of Gordon as he's walking in, and all you get these side eyes from all these suspicious cops looking at you, as they're doing it. And then we get, the complimentary shot to show that it was Batman that they were looking at. So they do it there. They do it again at another Batman scene. And there's another one they do too.
Bruce. I think it's when he's Bruce walking through the funeral.
Yeah, when he's going through the funeral, when he's chasing after Falcone with that girl, because he thinks the girl is Selena Kyle or whatever. But yes, they give us that's suspicious, but we don't know that it's a POV until it's revealed. We just think it's there. But it's almost like, in my eyes, like not putting us in the eyes of the characters, but literally in the physical space of the character. Like you're being looked at, awkwardly, or you're looking at this and you want it, and you don't even know who it is that is supposed to be wanting it, but you're like empathizing with the character before you even know who the character is. And I think that's really cool.
Definitely. I agree. Yeah. The camera work in this is like next level. I mean, courtesy probably mostly of Greg Fraser.
What do you guys think about, because to me, the fact that the movie's PG-13 kind of like detracts a little bit, but maybe that's just because I think that like the things that Deadpool and Logan and Joker have all shown is that like there really is an audience for a more serious superhero movie.
I feel like, to be completely fair to this movie, I think they could have benefited from being R and having that, at least in the language, or the violence, or seeing the effects of the violence. But to give it its credit, I think it pushed all the way to the limit. It did not feel like a censored movie. I felt like I wanted more from the violence or from this or that, just to get kind of a little more visceral effect. But it did as much as it possibly could. And and again too, I'm sure there's a lot of thinking behind it. It's also a kid superhero. You want to kind of appeal to this and that. Whereas the Joker was specifically kind of an unhinged, more adult take on it. So I do understand wanting this movie to reach the widest audience as possible.
Okay, but here's the thing. And this was true from the get-go. Warner Brothers was never going to take their most lucrative superhero property and make it a rated R movie, because that automatically blocks probably like, 25 to like 40% of their ticket base from going to that movie legally, right? It was never going to happen. Anyone who thought it was kidding themselves. Sorry, that's just like the way it's going.
Yeah.
But you're right in that they do push it to the limit of PG-13. But also, I don't think, yes, I'm interested in a rated R Batman movie. Like, who wouldn't be? But like, the fact of the matter is the way that they use the PG-13 rating is really effective, because they do it's all the in between the lines reading, right? Like I can't remember which person that the Riddler kills ends up in like the rat trap where they have like the commissioner. Yeah, that's so messed up, and like we don't need to see it to know what happens to that guy, right? Like, and that's what like they always say like the scariest part of any like situation or movie is always like what you can't see, or like what they don't show you. It's when it's left up to the imagination.
Like in Hereditary, right? we don't see the head until they
and like,
it's terrifying.
Exactly.
And that's what Reeves has a quote just like that. He says it's the idea that anticipation is as scary as anything a movie can be. Like what they don't see, people's imagination is the most effective tool in like creating terror or dread. Yeah, it's almost like what I thought of would have happened to his stomach and his face, like when that's happening, is probably even worse than what they could have shown. Like, even with an R rating.
Yeah, no, I don't think we lost anything with the PG-13, and this is the closest we ever get. That's fine, but like I think we'll see a rated R Batman movie after the franchise is like in the grave, and like Warner Brothers is like going to be like, okay, let's resurrect it. Exactly.
There's when they first kill the mayor, and then I think they kill the mayor and they kill the DA. And when they're doing that, there's like the focus moves out. So, and it looks beautiful. And I don't really know exactly if it's just the lenses they're using or if it's the aperture, but like when he's strangling or putting the bomb around the DA, like the focus goes from the Riddler and slowly moves out. And then the same thing happens with when he's killing the mayor, like he strikes him and then the
hammer or the
what do they call it?
It's a carpet
tucker,
tool,
tucker,
yeah. And it bounces, and then it's like, and it's already focused on the place that it's going to land.
Yeah, I think, and that's another cool thing too, is the way, because there's so many themes of this being like a detective film. There's so many themes of hiding the truth and obscuring this and that, and it's such a the way it was shot. The shot's always obscured by by rain, by lens flares coming off of these lights, by the shallow focus. We can't see him actually doing whatever he's doing to the DA because the aperture is either shooting like 1.8 and it's pulled all the way back. And but it's really cool because they often do a lot of reveals with that, and there's sometimes it's like stuff that we know, like we know that Batman was on his bike when Selena Kyle was in the taxi as she's driving back home that first night. But it's still so cool when they have her in the shot and then it kind of pans the back window and they rack focus out and he's there. And, the light that was shining on her the whole time that you don't really think about, then you realize, oh, that's his headlight on his car or on his bike. And it's just really cool the way they hide all these things in the shadows and this and that. And it's just really, really well done cinematography.
Yeah, there's I really appreciate that the movie starts out in Halloween, and actually we have this comic right here. They handed this to you guys.
Yeah, the IMAX.
I'm so upset that I missed out on this. But it's The Long Halloween, which influenced this movie. I think Matt Reeves specifically read this one before or something like that. But it's the opening shot is in Halloween, and then there's that. I mean, I think that this scene is what's going to be talked about the most about like who this Batman is like the shadow scenes, the monologue where he's talking about they don't know where I'm at, and he's just trying to like evoke fear.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, that's always been the implication of Batman is like the whole point of Batman is he's only one guy, but like he instills a fear in criminals, right? Like part of the reason he dresses up as a bat, from the comics, it's like him facing his fears is one thing because that's like his whole mantra, but it's also instilling fear in other people. And that's something that none of the other Batman movies have done as effectively or as in concise a space as this one did in the first 10 minutes. Like that montage where the signal hit, he says, and it was in the trailers, but what I love so much about the marketing for this movie is the trailers pointed toward these things that we didn't really put together, just like sort of the Riddler's clues. And then you watch the movie and you're like, oh, that's what they were doing. One of the lines from one of the teasers is when that light hits the sky, it's not a signal, it's a warning. And I was like, I didn't really get what that meant until, we see the movie, the signal hits the clouds. And all of these people who are doing, crimes of varying levels from like robbing a bank to just like graffiti see the sign and they're like, look, and the camera looks just like you were talking about, Spencer, that puts you right in the place of them and shows what they're seeing. Suddenly it cuts to like, like a shadow in the corner.
It makes the shadows the subject of the shadow. It's almost like, fear of violence is like what is being, captured in the frame. Right. And it's so cool.
Well, because then, right. So during that montage, we see the shadows, we see them like dropping their materials and running, because the point is like Batman's probably not in that shadow, but he could be. And if he is, like, you're screwed. And then when we finally do see, that gang about to beat up the guy who comes off the subway, and
Asian hate.
They see the signal hit the sky. And then it cuts to the direct shot of the hallway, and you hear the boots, right? And like this Batman is not, what I love about this Batman is he's not like super stealthy like other Batman. Like that's not his point. His point is all about the fear and intimidation. So you hear the footfalls, and that's like a character in and of itself, right? And then he comes out of the shadow, and we get our first great look at his Batman. And like they were just the unlucky ones out of all the people that night. Like they were the ones unfortunate enough to like come face to face with Batman.
The first time I watched it, this is the scene where I was like, uh-oh, like, because and I tried to count in the second viewing, but he takes so many steps before. And I saw I think it was a tweet or a Letterboxd review. It's like this movie's runtime could have been cut in half half if he just walked faster. It's like, I mean, but the second time when I was giving it the more charitable view, I really appreciated it, and I think that it's just very intentional, and it goes to the character that I think Pattinson wanted to create, because he in another interview he talks about it being like when Pattinson or when Bruce puts on the suit, it like gives him powers. And because like Bruce is just this like weak dude who's kind of sulking.
He's got a jaw of steel though, no matter how many bolts he takes on his jaw or punches, and
it's like square.
Exactly, yeah. And nothing's gonna stop him there.
Like that.
Yeah. But I mean, because that scene is, I watched it in Big D the first time and then IMAX the second time. In IMAX, it was like incredible. Yeah,
for sure.
But like just an aside right there, with this scene, what's interesting is that the people that the criminals are wearing paint on their face. So it's like kind of the question of whether or not the Joker is a character already. Did they inspire these people because they're wearing clown paint?
That was something that was like talked about in the marketing originally. They're like, like maybe this is like a Joker gang. I am of the mind that they were just like
skeletons. It's Halloween.
Like a street gang. And like the one who like is conflicted, which is probably like an initiation thing, only has half his face painted.
That was a little
like,
too like
it was a long
on the nose there, yeah.
But I mean, to your point, like it was a little bit of a bait and switch, because they're like, or I guess a bait and switch and bait, because they're like, oh, maybe the Joker's in this, and we watch it and the Joker's not in it, until of course I assume anyone listening to this has seen it already, but so if not, I guess, well, we've already been spoiling all sorts of stuff. But and then of course we get probably the one unnecessary scene in the movie.
I agree.
The tease of Joker in Arkham Asylum, already played by Barry Keoghan. It was an unnamed Arkham prisoner is what he's credited as, but you see him in shadow, you see his face. Looks like a very promising Joker design, and also he's got the laugh. So like I was excited at the idea of Barry Keoghan playing Joker in this universe, because he's a great actor and I'm sure he could bring something like big to the role. But initially my first reaction was like, we're doing this again. Like we've had so many Jokers in the last 10 years. Like,
yeah. And it just felt really forced. Like it was like,
well, here, so it's because I was watching an interview earlier with Matt Reeves himself, and there actually was another scene earlier in the movie that made it almost to the cutting room floor or I guess was left on the cutting room floor. Makes my analogies there, but and it was a scene where, in order to understand this Riddler's psychology as he's trying to like work through these clues, Batman visits a prisoner who's yet to become the Joker,
right?
And visits a prisoner in Arkham who he's faced before in some capacity, to like try to understand him. And in that one, Matt Reeves talks about this guy's very hidden in shadow, and he has that. I think their take on it is the one where he's got kind of like a congenital disease where not like he laughs, but he smiles. And so that's why he's got like the really high, cheekbones. You can kind of see that a bit through the windows of the cell in the end. But it was supposed to be another scene there. And then when he cut that scene, he's like, oh, I don't know about this final scene. And so he cuts this final scene, but he felt that it took, because right before that, or right before and after, they kind of have a pair of scenes where Batman and Catwoman are having their discussions about kind of what's going on next, this and that, where they're parting ways.
Yeah.
And she mentions that the city's going to fall apart now. There's a power vacuum. Everyone's going to be grabbed for power. This is that. Because Falcone's dead. The Riddler's in jail. It's like, really, who's in charge? Is the Penguin going to get there? Are there other gangs out there? And Matt Reeves said he felt there was the threat that she was bringing up wasn't real unless you had the scene where you could literally see, people start to take advantage of the power being grabbed. This a guy that in theory you hadn't seen this whole film is now like,
interesting.
There's a spot for us to get in there.
I do think the Penguin's sufficient enough though,
because they also have that same shot where he's taking Falcone's place literally like in his window there. So Matt Reeves' take on the architecture and kind of the world building of Batman seems to be way different from the kind of like I don't want to disparage the Nolan ones, but you can't. It was just Chicago. Yeah, and there was no emphasis placed on kind of building that world. It was more on the intricacies of the characters and the plot. So like it's just Matt Reeves' attention was directed. I could see there was a lot of care taken into crafting this world with the clubs, with the Gothic architecture and the towers.
The Iceberg Lounge.
Exactly. Yeah. What were you guys' thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, I love that he really kind of incorporating the Iceberg Lounge like we've never seen before. I think maybe Tim Burton did, but I think that like it really showed that Matt Reeves had an appreciation for the comics and the source material, which I really liked. Also, it kind of meets Nolan's and Tim Burton's in the middle, because Tim Burton's is like,
I feel like it takes the world of Tim Burton and like grounds it to like the gritty level that like
Tim Burton's is like a nightmare, like gothic clown world.
And it's also like I feel like I should be riding a little roller coaster through it.
Yes,
but I also think it like really helped define like the feeling of Batman for a lot of people, because I mean, what does he have 3 movies, or I think he only has 2
movies?
Yeah, and then
2 that Burton did.
Yeah, and I mean, like our parents grew up watching those ones, and it's like.
It kind of sets that world apart. Like it kind of brings life to a comic book, because you have all the Superman comics, the Spider-Man's, this and that, but Spider-Man's literally in New York. Metropolis kind of more or less is New York, and it's just like there's not as much character placed in there, but like the world of Gotham, with its myriad villains, and there's there's the intricate underworld, and it's kind of very isolated in the world. You never hear America or our greater country. It's like it's almost like everyone in Gotham lives there and you can't leave, and like this is just the world that kind of spreads. Almost like a Lord of the Flies type deal in that city.
It was almost like too grungy though, to the point where I was like, no one would voluntarily live.
You like take a shower after it. Yeah.
And I love how like 90% of the time it's just raining, just pouring in Gotham for no reason.
Well, I think that
trash everywhere. There's graffiti. Like it's just a hellhole. Like I mean, I like that.
Someone pointed out that the rain seems to be a theme, because like the rain gets heavier as it goes.
And that's why I wish I had made
and then we have the flood.
Yeah, I wish I had made a note of it on my second rewatch, because I think I'm sure, because obviously they're making the rain, so it's intentional in how they do it. But I'm curious as to what scenes at night it rains and which ones it doesn't.
Yeah,
and like whether that corresponds to like the action that's happening, to the mood that a character's in. Like I wish I had, and obviously when we can stream it, I'll like look through and kind of see, because there's probably 15-20 night scenes, and it's probably raining in like 12 of them, but there's a few that it wasn't, and I think that would be an important aspect to look at.
There was I think my favorite part of Gotham that they showed, and I think it is like to your point, Liam, like the marriage between Burton and Nolan is like Gotham's like Times Square or whatever they call it, with all the like advertisements and everything, the boards. It's like Times Square on steroids. There's just like screens everywhere, which feels very contemporary.
There's also very little color to that too.
Yes, but with that New York sort of element, it's like also you can tell historic Gotham, because the street that goes around it's like cobblestone with like street lights, and that marriage was so perfect somehow. Like it is simultaneously like Gothic and contemporary.
Yeah, I even pointed that out to Spencer right after we watched it. I was like, I mean, it was Times Square, and it felt like I automatically recognized that it was supposed to be or resemble Times Square. But then I'm looking at it, I'm like, what? But something feels off. Like it feels Gothic, and it feels like it exists in this like fantasy world.
Which is like I'm glad we only see like a phone like 2 times.
Well,
I know Spencer's got issues with phones in movies.
No phones in movies. You can't do that. Just take them out. I don't want to see them. I don't want to hear them. Put your phone away. I don't want them in the theater. I don't want them on the screen. It's just not on set either. I'm sure nothing.
Well, that kind of goes to like the Riddler's use of like social media, which is kind of awkward. He's kind of a 4chan guy. and that
I like that. I like that though.
I did too. And I mean, like just to mention the phone again, like the FaceTime. I actually didn't recognize it. Like most times phones are introduced in movies, like you kind of step back and you're like, what the fuck are they doing here? But like in this one, it was like such a part, like it was a part of the plot that I never once was taken out of it.
Honestly, the only unrealistic part of that entire thing is that like the amount of times as someone who works in news, the amount of times one of the anchors like, just so you know, what you're about to see is like really disturbing. And then they show someone just like getting mutilated on live television. I'm like, there is no way any broadcaster would show that ever.
There's no FCC.
There's no FCC in Gotham's America.
Yeah, the FCC is busy in the iceberg lounge down there.
It's like the 3rd time she was just like, what you're about to see may be disturbing. And it's just like someone getting their face nibbled off by rats or whatever.
Like a guy getting his head blown off in the funeral of the other guy who got his head taken off.
Anyway, but yes, no, to your point though, the like 4chan guy, whatever, I don't know. I like that it's highlighting what has become a legitimate contemporary issue in just like the developed world of like the technology has made it a lot easier for like very small isolated, self-contained sort of like extremist cells to grow and to like gain following, and like then they feed off of each other. And like it's I mean, we've seen that with like lone wolf attacks in the past, right? Like this guy built a following, and like people were making fun of it online. They're like, they're making fun of the line about him having like 500 followers.
That's what I loved, and I think that was so cool that like, of course he only had 500 followers. Like there's not more than 500 people, you know, in the whole, you know, out of 3 million people that were ascribed to that little viewpoint.
Exactly.
But the damage that also that little group was able to cause, because they could all kind of coalesce like into that thing.
500 is a scary amount because their ringleader is the Riddler, who is an unhinged maniac looking to like just like kill for sport, and also to like unveil a truth about Gotham, right? Like 500 is like terrifying. Like and like you see the chats on the side about like, oh no, go get masks from here, whatever, like make sure it's this. It felt real in a very like it did ride that line of me being like, no, but it was real enough that I liked what they did with the character, because you can't do Jim Carrey's Riddler today. It would not fly, and also not in this movie. So what do you do? And also, how do you differentiate Riddler from Joker, right? Because those two characters, I mean, jokes and riddles are two sides of the same coin, right? So like, well, what do? They make Joker like an agent of like chaos and mania, and Riddler very, very calculated and precise.
So that's what he says. It's like all you need is a little bit of, you know, concerted, focused violence. You know, he's got the great plan, and it's like it's almost like his whole ethos is taking this like chaotic either world that he wants to create or the order of the world that he wants to bring down, and like distilling it into this. And he kills, you know, this guy, kills this guy. You know, it's so precise. And then he has Batman working with him essentially, like as that little guy who's just his you know, his anvil that he just drops whenever he needs
and
it.
And like Batman's like trying to solve it, but also the only way he can solve it is by being a pawn in Riddler's game.
Mm-hmm.
The first time you really notice that that's happening is in a DA scene when he walks up and he's interrogating the DA, because if you put yourself in the place of the cops who are outside at that point, he's asking the same questions that the Riddler is. Mm-hmm. He's investigating the cop at that point. Yeah, like he's totally detached.
And the Riddler could never get face to face with the DA, and the Riddler could never, you know, get Falcone and take him out of his trap and bring him into the light to get shot. It's just like he's like a hired muscle, you know.
So for all we know at this point, like the Batman is working with the Riddler from anyone else's perspective.
Well, there's probably a compelling argument that like Gotham PD could make that he's an accomplice.
Yeah. Like. And that goes to the interrogation scene when Batman's like beating up on 5 cops just in this jail cell.
That was so great.
Yeah.
That's man, the way this movie has such a great blend of the like absurdity of the Burton movies with the grounded realism of the Nolan movies, right? Like it is grounded, but like specific things are grounded, right? Like the technology of the world is grounded, and like the Batman character is grounded, but it's got just that edge of comic book camp, right? Of like him being in that room with like all those police officers. I mean, Gotham PD just has like 5 million police officers, and they're always in the same room at the same time, and they're always just like, hey.
And when he escapes, they all run down the hallway.
Seriously, and they're just like shooting up their own goddamn face. And he just uses the grappling hook and goes through this like spiral staircase. It's like 13 endless floors.
They have a tower, it's like a whole tower of Gotham PD.
It was so stupid, but I loved it because it is that little hint of just like comic book weirdness in this otherwise very grounded movie.
Well, the same thing happens after the Riddler kills Falcone, because they are running into his apartment room, and they're all screaming and they have their guns up already. It's like
it's so stupid, but I love it. I love it. I mean, there's so many examples of that happening in this movie. Like, I mean, I'll just pivot us now. Colin Farrell's Penguin, right? Mm-hmm. MVP of this movie, hands down. Because and people were like, well, they buried him under all this makeup. Why even get Colin Farrell? And it's like, oh, it's because you didn't recognize him under that makeup that they got Colin Farrell. Like the voice and the actual acting on display there was absolutely just as transformational as Robert Pattinson was.
And he knows Spanish.
Yeah, he knows Spanish better than
Batman
and Gordon. But his performance was great. But like the reason I bring him up is because he also is comic book campy, right? Like it's he's weird. He's just a guy with like a kind of pointed nose and this like absolutely outrageous Brooklyn accent, running this nightclub that would absolutely be busted up in the real world because it's gigantic with every like, anyway, point being, his little waddle after he gets captured and everything, like he is absurd. We're not supposed to take him seriously. Like we are, but we're also not. And
well,
that's
it's also playing our relationship with him, because the fact that we don't take him seriously and no one else does,
right?
That's his, that's his chip on his shoulder. He's always pissed off. And he's like, I'll spray you dead or whatever. He's like, he's going to shoot Falcone right there because Falcone's not taking him seriously because he's just a waddling, little sidekick kind of guy.
That's my favorite scene at the recycling plant, because I mean, I'm genuinely, even though he is an absurd character, I'm terrified of Penguin at that point.
Unhinged.
Yeah. He's a mob boss. He's got a lot of power in that capacity, right?
And that goes to the new series that they're going to have with him. I think that
I
haven't been following all of the Marvel series, but like I will follow.
Oh yeah, I'm super excited about it. I mean, the prosthetics are like really, the craft on display in this movie is like really incredible. But like the prosthetics that are on him are next level, because like, you look at Dune and like Baron Harkonnen is in a giant like fat suit and like it took forever to get him into that, but like the most he does is just kind of like drifts along and like he kind of like he'll like move his fingers a little bit and like eat some stuff. But like Colin Farrell is out like in the pouring rain with like people running around him, getting kind of like beat up and moved around and bruised, and that makeup stays just flawless on him. And it's not just makeup; he's in like plastic and crap. Like it's just amazing. I mean, I think like that's his makeup alone is grounds for like a best makeup nom for Batman at next year's Oscars, honestly.
And I'm so excited that they chose to go that direction instead of the whole green suit on, the motion capture or something, and then they just superimpose like CGI of like that on him. Like it's another aspect of just making it feel like really real and grounded. I like that a lot. So we're hitting the Iceberg Lounge up this weekend. What do you guys think of that place?
Absolutely phenomenal. It was great. It was perfect. I loved his weird little roost over the whole thing that he like hung out.
Oh, they had the great shots where they would like cut out too, and like the sound would like come in and they cut back in.
Best part about the Iceberg Lounge was the 3 times Batman/Bruce Wayne went there. And the first time as Batman, he asked him like, "Do you know who I am?" or whatever, and they like brush him off, which like also that's dumb. You don't brush off Batman. And then he just bruises his way in while everyone's still just like dancing and stuff. Great. Second time, I believe the second time he comes as Bruce Wayne, and like he's like, "Do you know who I am?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, like come right in." But it's like absurd. It's like crazy because like Bruce Wayne, like you said, never goes out. And then the third time, he just doesn't even bother, and he's got like the hood up and he's got the makeup on. He still has the eye makeup on for the Batman suit, and like he just knocks and then he opens it and he's not there, and then he like sneaks his way in, like,
and he kind of comes in as Bruce Wayne Batman. Yeah. And then the next time you see him after he's messing with the fuses, like he is Batman when he starts fighting them all.
That was so great. I love that.
I also love that, like, and someone might be able to correct me on this, but I think the 44 Below part, like the club within the club, isn't a part of the comics. I'm not.
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, and I think it would be really cool if somehow Mr. Freeze is associated with this.
Because yeah,
I know that the Iceberg Lounge is the Penguins thing, but like if somehow Mr. Freeze is associated with 44 Below, or like we have an origin story with him, that would be really cool.
Well, he's a top contender, well, at least among fans, for a villain in a sequel to this movie, because he hasn't been adapted since Arnold Schwarzenegger and I think like Batman and Robin.
In like 97,
which was
with Poison
atrocious.
Ivy.
Yeah, but
Poison Ivy.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but I really liked it as a kid.
Well, yeah, that does
as a kid,
yeah. But no, like I think like Reeves could do a really interesting Mr. Freeze in the next one. I mean, like, because his universe is really grounded, but I still think he could do it. Like because we've established this like sort of middle ground between camp and realism. That's where I think like Mr. Freeze would be like really strong, but well.
So I come at a lot of these comic book movies from, I did not watch a lot of read a lot of comics or watch a lot of these kinds of things to begin with. I'm not a fan really of like all the Marvel stuff. Like that's not really where it doesn't appeal to me very much. And so I think one of the reasons I like this movie was because of the lack of the Bat stuff. You know, it's like the complete antithesis of the Adam West Batman. You know, it's like, you know,
Yeah.
give me the Bat shark spray, you know,
Right.
and the Bat copter and the Bat this, the Bat ladder. Like, let me put on my Bat shoes. Like, I got to pull up my Bat belt. Like, you know, all that. And it's like, you know, you only even hear the Riddler is the only one that refers to him as the Batman for a long time. And he's like the Batman.
Yeah.
You know, the man bat almost.
Right.
And then at the very end, he calls himself that. I think the end.
The first time they ever say the Batman out loud is Robert Pattinson. Before that, I think Zoe Kravitz, Catwoman, refers to him as Batboy, and that's the closest we get to it. Other than
when he says maybe, well, because he tells Gordon when they're in the like the morgue looking at the bodies, like maybe it's time for like all this to end or whatever.
Yeah.
And Gordon's like, what? And he's like the Batman, right?
Yeah.
Like,
But
like the concept of the Batman.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think I liked it so much, or it worked so well for me because it didn't have those elements. I'm curious, as you know, you guys who have, you know, at least followed it or have more familiarity with that, or at least more drawn to it. Like, what did you think about the lack of really like Batman? You know, even his Batmobile is just like a souped up muscle car, which I loved, but you know, it's very much not, you know, throwing batarangs around and, you know, flying through the air in his big brooding cave or anything.
This is just it's a different Batman, and it needs to be, because every time they adapt the character, reboot it, it has to have its own identity, or else it's a pointless like retread of old ground, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
but I also think that even though, you know, we don't have like really identifiable like Batman stuff going on here, it is still all of those things are still Batman's things, right? Like, and I also think it's important to remember that this is a really young Batman, which we have not really seen in a lot of these movies before. Like even Christian Bale's Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy, he sort of comes into the Batman mantle pretty long into adulthood. Like he's probably in his like 30s, and like by the end of the series in his early 40s as Batman. But this is a Batman who started quite young. Like he's in his second year, but he's probably only mid 20s at the oldest, maybe late 20s, you know? And so he's still assembling this Batman identity, right? He's so early in his career. The Batmobile is just a muscle car. That was, a huge muscle car, but like a muscle car, all the same. And he's got, you know, he doesn't have batarangs, but he's got the like knives that he pulls out of the bat symbol, or like, I don't even know what you'd call them. It's like just kind of an all-purpose tool as a bat symbol. And he's got the grappling hook, but it's kind of like built into his gauntlets, and he's got adrenaline that he can like, it's very practical, but also comic booky. And I really like that. But, you know, I'm not bent out of shape about the like lack of Batman stuff. Cause like, I'm only familiar with the sort of film Batman. I didn't read many comics either. I'm only familiar through like what I've heard, like third party about the comics, because I consume a lot of that content. But, you know, he's a very different Bruce Wayne, a very different Batman from anything we've seen before. And like the most recent Batman, of course, was Ben Affleck's Batman. And he exists in a totally different kind of universe than
it's like an Avengers, level, there's aliens and stuff.
It's like he's more like a cosmic Batman, which we haven't seen in the comics before. And that's why like that's so great on its own. And like also it doesn't need to die. It can like also exist like a cosmic Batman. Like that can be its own thing, while we have a grounded, you know, contained Bat universe going on with the Reeves Batman, right? Like I think those two things can coexist at once.
Yeah, I think I agree. And a lot of criticism has been made about like the multiverse and the different interpretations of Batman, and whether.
And you mean like DC is kind of like standalone type of multiverse, not like the integrated one, like a Marvel.
Well, I mean,
like how they had several versions of Batman. They just did like 3 Jokers in the last 5 years or whatever.
Yeah. So I think it's both. There's a critique of like the different renditions of Batman and the fact that we keep recycling them. I think that you hear that often, that a lot of people don't like that, but you also, I've heard people say that they really don't like the idea of a multiverse, but I especially really like the way that DC is handling it, because it allows for director visions or
it's just like these like tour films. So standalone kind of deals.
Even if, you know, somewhere down the road, like the multiverse does bring in Pattinson's Batman and like, I don't know,
Joaquin's Joker.
Yeah, Joaquin's Joker. Like I still think that it would be really rough, and I would see people like criticizing that.
Yeah.
But I think that what we have now is justification for this, where it's like, yeah, this is just set in another universe.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people hate that, and there's a lot of criticism of like well, people are abandoning the source material, but I think it kind of gives more freedom, and we get to see people, create what they think Batman is.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of, it's almost, it may be diverging from the source material in that it's, it's not following things directly, but like it's kind of replicating the way the source material came about. Like I haven't read much of these comic book strips, but there's a whole bunch of different, storylines, and this and that. They have, a run of, 50 edition or issues, and then another one they have, Batman in space. They have Batman and Robin. They have Batman fighting the Riddler and Mr. Freeze and Joker. There's several different Jokers, and it's almost like recreating that kind of almost like open source Batman, on the screen. This is you had the Batman in space with Ben Affleck, and now you have more grounded Batman. You had the kind of campy Tim Burton Batman. It's the same thing that they kind of did in the comics. I think that's kind of it's an interesting way that in a roundabout way it almost is truer to the source material than something like Marvel, which just homogenizes all of them kind of together into one canon stream.
Yeah, well, point of clarification, Ben Affleck's Batman actually doesn't go to space at any point in his movies.
But there's space comes to him.
Space comes to him. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Well, I am wondering though, like being that you are you like the Justice League series a lot more, I'm guessing. What do you think about this movie like this take on Batman compared to it? And maybe you don't like to compare them. What do you think of that?
Well, they are. I mean, I really love this movie. Like I love it in the same way I love The Dark Knight, which also has no connection to the DC EU, the DC Extended Universe, which is Warner Brothers' own sort of like Marvel-esque connected universe they have going on right now, right? Like Dark Knight and the Batman exist totally separate from those things, but it doesn't make me like them any less. But I think that I honestly do think that's just because it's Batman, right? Like because he is as a character such a fertile grounds for different versions of that character, and I love to see the different ways that they come up with that. Really, the only thing that leaves me a little bit bitter about this Batman is because this movie, down to the title of the Batman, was always supposed to be Ben Affleck's solo Batman film. That was what it was originally conceived as. And originally Ben Affleck was going to direct and star in that movie. And then he stepped down from the directorial role, and Matt Reeves stepped in, still working with Ben Affleck as Batman in the DC cinematic universe. And then ultimately Ben Affleck decided to leave the movie entirely because he said he was never happy with the script, but this was also right around the time he was dealing with a lot of problems like alcoholism and his career. And he was kind of going through this really terrible time in his life right off the back of Justice League, which was a terrible filming experience for him after all of, the kerfuffle went down. So it became a Matt Reeves movie, and Matt Reeves went to Warner Brothers and was like, well, can I just make this my own thing? Right. And after all of that happened, that was absolutely the right move. Like this, he did just need to make it his own thing, because if Ben Affleck wasn't going to be in it, like I would have hated for them to pin it to the DC universe and just like pull up like another Batman from some random place and then just like put Robert Pattinson alongside like Gal Gadot and Henry Cavill. Like that would have been so weird. So, some people thought when Robert Pattinson was cast, they might be doing a Ben Affleck Batman prequel movie where Robert Pattinson was a younger Bruce Wayne to Ben Affleck's old jaded Bruce Wayne we see in Batman v Superman. But yeah, anyway, I like that it's independent. I really do. But I mourn for the Batman that I missed, which was Ben Affleck's solo movie, because I really think that his interpretation is also really good. I love that he's this old grizzled, asshole who is sort of like coming back to the light a little bit. Whereas like Robert Pattinson's Batman is going through that arc early in his career a little bit.
So Vengeance is,
Yes. Hi, nice to meet you. Vengeance.
Exactly. Yeah. Mr. Vengeance. So, it's definitely a theme in the movie, and that's kind of, and it's interesting how it is almost satirized or satirized in the movie. They're kind of making jokes at the expense of Mr. Vengeance there, but but what do you guys think about it? Because you talked about the jaded asshole version of Ben Affleck, and we have kind of like the refined, charismatic, like put the world on my shoulders aspect of like Christian Bale. And so this revenge, this young like Kurt Cobain, grungy, inspired, almost like he's taking revenge, for whatever. It's like lashing as a teenager, lashing out. Like, what do you guys think of that take on it?
Well, I really liked a point you made earlier about like how we didn't know certain things that were said in the trailer. We didn't really know the meaning of.
Yeah.
This is the same thing with Vengeance,
Yep.
because I thought it was just a one-off. He was
Me
like,
too.
like I thought this was just going to be a theme, you know, defining who Batman was. He, you know, he was just taking vengeance on the world and like, but then we learn throughout the movie that he's only referred to as Vengeance. That's his name.
That is, I will say, as a theme, I really liked it, but I couldn't. There was some part of me that couldn't like suspend my disbelief enough to like believe that like Zoe Kravitz would go up to like Robert Pattinson and be like, you know, what's up, Vengeance or whatever. Like, because it's like he what's confusing to me, and I think like the implication of that I did not understand in the movie is that like he says that after he like beats the shit out of that like one guy and he's like, I'm Vengeance or whatever. And I'm like, damn, what a line. But like then the fact that everyone else is calling him Vengeance implies that like he says that to everyone he beats up on the street, because like everyone knows it. Like no one else should know that, but except for the like, group of like 6 people, unless he is going around calling himself Vengeance, in which case I'm like, I mean, I guess maybe, I mean, I think like what the movie's a little bit unclear about is if like he is known as like Batman or if he's actually like known colloquially as Vengeance. And if it's the latter, I didn't like that very much. But as a theme, I loved it because it does come back around. Even if like the execution wasn't exactly what I wanted, it totally comes back around at the end when one of the Riddler goons is like, I'm Vengeance, and like to him on the balcony. And like in that moment, he's like, oh man, like if the people that I'm beating up are saying the same thing that I'd say to them, like what does that actually make me? Like when he hears that come out of his mouth, I think it's that theme of like Riddler, Batman, 2 sides of the same coin, like him being sort of pulled through this by Riddler and being his puppet. He realizes in that moment, like, I am actually no better than the people I'm like trying to bring to justice, as long as my main motivation is vengeance.
Well, and I don't think he is better. You know, in the very scene, it's like he is taking revenge. He goes out and it's almost like it's just an act of focused violence or like brutality. He you know, so much so that when he saves, in the first scene we see him, you know, he takes his 30-second walk down the hallway, and he beats up the skeleton guys and then the half face and everything, and he doesn't even help. You know, the poor Asian man that got beat up. He just, you know, beats the shit out of everybody. So much so that the victim isn't even thankful. The victim is scared to death.
Yeah.
The only thing he says, you cut to the victim after all this, instead of saying, thank you, Mr. Vengeance, blah, 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 this and that. He says, don't hurt me,
dude. Yeah.
And he's scared of that. But then by the end, the last act that Batman does, you know, obviously he's got the long scene of him with the National Guard. That was kind of weird on top of the roof. I didn't like all that. But when he's rescuing people in that beautiful scene shot inside the Staples Center, or the Square Garden, not Staples, that's different.
Yeah, Gotham Square Garden.
Gotham Square Garden.
That's like the laziest rebrand I've ever heard in my entire
But you know,
life.
that's all he's doing in that scene. He's doing that, you know, fighting people, this and that.
Right.
And then the guy says, I'm Vengeance.
Yeah.
And then he sacrifices himself to save people.
Yeah,
exactly. And then every single action he takes after that is helping someone directly.
Yes.
Not like fighting the bad guys, not fighting crime.
And just like, and then like effing off after he like beats someone up. Like he's like, oh wait, I need to take it one step further and be like, you know, instead of retributive, I need to like be restorative, right? I need to actually like
his version of justice.
Yes, he literally changed his version of justice. Oh, that's so cool.
So, well, when I first watched this, I watched a review that was very critical of that message, and the review was trying to say that like Matt Reeves hates Batman, and that like really Batman's core is vengeance, and like the fact that he does change. And I will say, upon first viewing, when he has that monologue talking about hope at the end, when I heard hope, I was like, oh, that's just a Superman line. like he kind of become. So I understood where the person was coming from when I first watched that review. But then I was talking with Spencer after, and I'm like, well, I mean, does Batman really instill fear in people? Like, I don't think that is his version of justice. No. It's more of a commentary on a fear, I think, in general.
Go ahead.
Well, no, it's just like it's so obnoxious. Sometimes like Batman fans just like annoy the hell out of me because I'm just like no one like allows a character to be interpreted in different ways. Like they just have this one idea of Batman and like that's it, which is so annoying. But like the point is not that like Batman is now like a Superman figure of like, you know, he's not going to be this he's not no one that a child's ever going to look up to, right? The point is he's a bruiser saint, right? Like he comes in and like just wrecks shop. He's always going to have that streak of anger in him because he's a damaged guy. Yeah. But like now he's just like, in order to like actually, his point is not like I need to be a symbol of hope necessarily. His point is, in order to prevent the system that I'm fighting against, I need to like basically raise Gotham out of its own filth, right? Yeah. Like I need to show people like what can be done to help them so that like we don't have more people who are just like, it's so in despair that they're resorting to crime, right? Like that's his point, is like, I can show them a better version of Gotham and of themselves, right?
And I think in the same monologue, he actually doubles down on that and says like there will still be criminals in the shadows, which distances himself from the shadows at the end. He's not a part of that. Like the criminals are in the shadows and he goes into the shadows to fight them. But like
but he doesn't live there with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and to the point of the criticism that they were leveling, it's not necessarily that he's now foregoing revenge or foregoing vengeance. Like it's now almost. And this goes back to earlier when we were talking about his legacy. His legacy that he's pursuing is not the Wayne family legacy at the beginning. It was all the legacy of like, taking revenge against these people is like the legacy. But it's like, it's not that he's foregoing the revenge. It's that he's taking revenge in a different manner. And his revenge is, if however cliche is, to build a better world. Like, almost as like an act, like in spite of like to spite the violence that took his parents from him. He's now taking revenge, both in fighting the criminals and beating them up, and then also helping the people up and, helping the poor boy. Like he needed the hand when he was a kid, when his parents died, like helping that boy out of the water in Gotham Square Garden. And, but it's like, that's now his version. It's like he has a clearer picture of how to go about taking revenge instead of just lashing out. He's like, let's target it. Let's hit the right things. But he's still vengeful. And, he's still doing that almost maybe not out of a desire for a better world, but it could still be like, let's create a better world to screw over these people that like killed my parents. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily as good hearted as it's made out to
be.
And from this, we've kind of had a narrative that the movie is woke. And I don't know how you guys feel about that. There's only one line that I do think is very forced. And even if they wanted to have this message, even if they wanted to have a message about, white class males, white privileged males, they didn't have to say, well, there's a system of white privileged males. Essentially, like, how did you put it?
Well, because it's in a way like the message, and the message is kind of prevalent throughout. It's taking down the, and it can be, you can characterize it as your patriarchy or your white privilege or this and that, but it's taking down the dominance, the people, the corrupt people at the top of this hierarchy. And so that's a message throughout the film. But like the use of the phrase white privilege, it was less so that I'm critiquing the phrase and more so that it just didn't belong. It's like saying Medicare for all in like a Batman movie. Yeah. Like it was just too much of a colloquial phrase that just didn't fit in that world. And so, but the message, and I think that they did well the rest of the movie because they got that message across of tearing down this corrupt system and they didn't,
Well, and it's no coincidence that all the like people in power in this Gotham are like old white male gangsters, right?
Or at least establishment types.
Right, they're establishment, right? Like, and so like that message is in there. Like Batman's trying to make a Gotham for everyone, and like these figureheads are preventing a lot of that from happening because they're so corrupt.
It's also interesting that there's, while they kind of, the ways that the 4chan group, use their violence to overthrow the system. It's like both they had the disenfranchised, woman of color in this situation, Zoe Kravitz, and she's being trodden down, but they also had the disenfranchised poor white, incel types that were following Riddler, and they were both trying to fight this down. And it was almost like Batman was kind of repressing both of them because he stopped Zoe Kravitz from actually killing and, getting to their level. And he's like, wait, let's put down both of these, almost like rebellions, and then let's build it the right way. And so that was kind of an interesting way too, because it also did show the disenfranchisement of those, the white incel types that everyone loves to kind of dismiss. Cause it's like, their methods are bad, but like they do have a point in that they're just, they are also, those people are also living on the fringes. They've been dismissed. They've been laughed. Paul Dano was, or not Paul Dano, the Riddler was that orphan that wasn't Bruce Wayne. They're both white and they both have this, but it was more of a comment on the class.
It is more of a comment about the classism, because I think like even is her name Real? Is that what the
Bella Real?
Oh, Bella Real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like she
Real change. It's a great slogan.
Real change.
She's born to be a politician.
I mean, because like they might even be going a more classism route rather than racism route, because I mean she does get elected.
Oh, I think it's certainly more classism than racism in this movie.
Yeah, well, what's interesting too, and maybe I think a lot of people really could hate this if they like the racism angle and that interpretation, they might hate this, but I think it would be great if Real is actually a villain. And I was explaining this to Spencer. I think it's too specific for them to go this route. But why is it that both the Riddler and Real are against the renewal program? Because I think that the one of the first lines she ever says is essentially abandon reform, let's abolish. Like she said, I'm done with renewal. We've been renewing for the last 20 years. That's exactly what the Riddler is saying throughout the entire movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, he kind of gets her elected by killing all these people.
Although that may be his point. Like, and he maybe wanted to get her elected because she wanted to abolish this thing that was actually just like a laundering scheme for all these rich guys, right? So like maybe he did want her to get elected, but also the like difference between like him doing it out of the goodness of his heart is that he also just wanted to then send a message by like flooding Gotham and like killing a bunch of people, because it's just like it's all corrupt, right? But like the Real is like in there as like an actual symbol of like what could change potentially. I mean, like that's how I read it, is like, especially once we found out that the renewal project was just like a scheme, you know what I mean? Or like it
wasn't originally, but then when he died, it left
exactly
a power vacuum of the money.
Yeah, it was like an easy way to just like get money from point A to point B, which was like such a great reveal too. I loved that commentary. But I did want to flip back real fast. You mentioned Zoe Kravitz as Selena Kyle, Catwoman, Spencer. Like I feel like we would be doing a disservice to the movie to not talk about her. So good as Selena Kyle and Catwoman. I think she had like the physicality, of course, like that's
line. Yeah.
Oh yeah. One that like the way she walked and her action scenes were so great, but like she also had a great dynamic with Robert Pattinson that I really liked throughout the movie. I liked how like she was sort of this like wild card figure that he was trying to restrain, because that's like always been the difference between Catwoman and Batman, is that Catwoman is usually after her own goals, right? But like occasionally those goals will overlap with Batman enough for them to work together. She's always just sort of this like, not necessarily anti-hero, because like she's been a Batman villain too sometimes, but like that's the point. It's like depending on what she wants, she will either clash with Batman or get along with him. And I think like that this movie handled that tension really well.
And I think that tension of her motives and what her end goal was really interesting, because it developed the tension between the characters and like the sexual tension between them, as well as the tension between them when they were they're going to kill that Kenzie guy on top of the roof or not. And then it's also because there are moments there where she could have if she had killed Carmine Falcone, like it could have turned the corner, and like it might not seem like it because she's a very attractive figure. And so I don't think that people really ever thought about the fact that she could be evil. But if you really dig down into her actions, she was, a trigger pull away from being someone that Batman would try to take down.
Oh yeah.
And he would do it, I think
technically he does at the end. He's chasing her down to stop her.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it is literally Bat versus Cat at the end.
Yeah.
Which and I mean, to go to the score, I know you wanted to talk about the score. I think I can't tell if it's their theme, but there's this really beautiful. So it's in the funeral song and when they're departing at the end. It's also a part of the Batman theme itself. But there's this very like
it's the heroic flip on Batman's theme.
It's exactly
it was surprised me when I first heard that track, the Batman. It's titled on. It's like it was released as like a single just before the movie came out, and it has of course the sort of when I have to think about what that theme is for Batman. Oh yeah, it's just like two notes. The Batman theme is literally just like two notes. So it has that like build up there, which I liked, and I liked the way it came around throughout the movie over and over again. But then it also has this heroic sweeping section or orchestral section that was really unexpected. It's very emotive, and that theme doesn't pop up very much, but it happens when he saves everyone from the electrical wire and he like flips. into a heroic life.
Yeah, and it's also like a hint of where his trajectory could go. He's at the threat of violence. Has the deep, low, bass notes, and then it's also like hints of like, wow, like there is a heroic figure hidden under the grunge and the makeup and everything,
which was so great. And that 2-note theme that Michael Giacchino, the composer, does for Batman is really great. I will say, not enough people are noticing that it is like really directly inspired by Hans Zimmer's Batman theme, which was like much more brash and like rageful, but it's so similar. And like his Batman theme motif is also just like 2 notes, like alternating between dun, 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 dun. Same thing for Giacchino's Batman score. And I'm just like, that's fine. But also, I mean, like that perfectly portrays the sort of like rage going on there. But one thing that like also I don't think enough people were talking about is the use of Something in the Way in the movie, that the Nirvana track, which is like I think the only time they do a actual song like needle drop, like from like that actually exists in like the real world. The beginning of that song and the way it is like basically just the Batman theme is so great. Like I don't know if like Giacchino took that from that song or like he'd done the score and then they're like, oh wait, this song sounds just like that. But the intro is so similar to that main Batman theme, and that's the song they used at in the first teaser for Batman or the first trailer. Was they used that song in the intro, and it was another example of something we heard in the trailers that actually had later significance later on, because that opening of Something in the Way it is essentially the Batman theme, which is like just ties that song and like the lyrics of the song so perfectly in with the rest of the score. I did not know that when I first saw the trailer, and then later I heard the actual Batman theme. I was like, wait, that's just like you just took that straight from the song, which was so great. What a great reveal! And like that song in the movie just fits so perfectly. Talking about the animals that he's trapped, all like, which of course we know later is one of them is Joker in Arkham already, and so he's been doing this for a while, And Underneath the Bridge is like the opening of that, the opening line of that song, and he's actually the Batcave is underneath like a railroad, a subway bridge line under Wayne Tower. So like, it's just, I don't know, it's just like perfect harmony, dude. I love that. And then the only other thing that I'd mentioned about the score, because I haven't had time to like break it down in detail, but the Selena Kyle Catwoman track is so great. It's this very noir romance violin sort of like, but it's got like a hint of menace to it,
Well, there's a hint of that in the Batman theme too, as well as when they finally depart from each other at the end.
Yes.
And that scene, it gave me chills the second time. The first time I watched it, I was like, I don't know. But when he stops and then it's like he's like contemplating whether or not he should take a left, but he leaves and goes towards Gotham, and she's going Blood
Haven, Sister City. I was reading a bit about it.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, that's my favorite part of the score is actually. I think I haven't thought about it too much either, but I think it is the theme of both of them together.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I need to look at that. The only other thing that I will say, well, Giacchino's always he does really well with all of his scores. I will say it didn't feel, I mean, it was good and it fit the tone of the movie really well, but I probably just I think I'm probably just biased to like the previous DC soundtracks with courtesy of Hans Zimmer, but like it's
hard not to be biased.
It is hard to be Hans Zimmer, but like those had so many like creative ways in which Zimmer would mix the motifs together from different characters and events and situations, and like
more storytelling.
Yeah, and this has some of that, like you were talking about, Lee, which is really good, but not quite to the extent of like the Zimmer ones, which is why I think they speak to me so much. There's one moment in the theater that just like blew my mind with the score. I'm so glad I had the experience in the theater, and I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it. But so Ave Maria is a recurring theme in the movie, and it's sort of this song that Riddler and has like a real connection to, and he starts like singing it to Bruce or Batman
because they say to Thomas Wayne like whenever he announced the renewal plan, like that's where all the kids were singing in the chorus, and he was in there, and he was in the chorus. Yeah, so that's where that originates from. But the Riddler's theme is Ave Maria in minor, which is
genius. It just gave me chills when he started. And the best thing is I had the best timing when I realized that too, because I realized it as he started singing it in the interrogation scene, which is like literally the best moment to have that realization, because then it moves right into the minor version of his theme, the Riddler theme. And I had just like chills all over, because I was like, that's so smart to have done that. And that is a great example of storytelling through the score that like maybe not everyone would pick up on, but once you do, it adds so much to the Riddler's character and his motivations. That song is his motivation. It is like the distilled, like animalistic, nonverbal version of his motivation.
Yeah.
Right.
And well, I mean, explicit too, because he's talking about the sins of your father to Bruce, like throughout the whole thing. And like, and I mean, at the end, I can't tell really what's happening at the end yet, but it seems like there's a baptismal theme when Batman falls into the water and like
and reemerges. Yeah. Oh yeah,
because I think that they were hinting at the fact that like Batman may have died with the cable, and then he rises up instead, because we get the hint at the beginning that he can't be electrocuted in the suit when he tases the guy. Right. So it comes back later. But yeah, we should just go through to share your thoughts with just how you rated it on Letterboxd. And then we can just hold it in.
Also, you should follow all of us on Letterboxd. I'm Austin406 on Letterboxd, or at Austin Amestoy on Twitter. We're all on Letterboxd, which is a really great like film criticism app. You can like log the movies you watch and write little reviews about it and everything. I give Batman full marks. I give it a 5 out of 5. I'm a little more like liberal with my 5s, I think, than like other people are on the app. And it's interesting because like I knew going out of the theater that it wasn't a perfect movie, right? Like I knew that objectively in my mind, because there were things that I didn't like about it 100%, right? Like the vengeance thing kind of threw me a little bit. I also felt like the middle, like between the second and third acts, like dragged a little bit. Even though we were getting great reveals, we just went from like we went through like 4 to 5 scenes of like expositional conversation, right? Which like for any other movie would be a pretty like big sin.
Or like a different character telling the same story. And, the next scene it's a different character giving a different eye, but they're just talking the whole time.
Right. And so like for any other movie, that'd be a pretty big sin. But like try as I might, like I'm sitting there like with the 4.5, 4, and I'm like, I can't do it. Like I had to give it a 5. Purely because I think as a movie, as a cohesive whole, it is so good. Like every element of the movie is in service to all the other elements of the movie. And I had the same experience watching Dune, where I was like, this is a movie that knows exactly what it wants to be, with a great directorial vision. And it just executes everything that it sets out to do almost to perfection, but like everything's in such harmony with all the other parts of the movie: the score, the acting, the casting, the costumes, the set design, the world design, the editing, the cinematography. It's all in service to the theme that we talked about, the like vengeance theme and the character of Batman. So that's just like the way I rate movies. I was like, man, it's just like as a whole, I'm just too impressed with it. And I also just think like it's a great testament to why we need more than just Disney making movies. Because like I like a lot of movies that Disney puts out. I really do. But like Warner Brothers, it's actually ironic. They fail at the things Disney tries to do and does so well, creating these interconnected universes. Warner Brothers has like sucked ass trying to create a DC connected universe, honestly, even though I really like it. But what they are really good at when lightning strikes is giving a director like full credence to make the movie that they want to make. And they know when to pick a director, or when they have like magic on their hands, right? Because they're like, they saw Matt Reeves' pitch and was like, okay, this is one where we give him as much control as we can, because we know he's going to make a good movie. And that was the result, was this really great Batman movie and a really great movie in general.
Yeah, I'm already pretty biased when it comes to Batman. I mean, he's my favorite superhero, and like, I think that I'm very happy that you brought up the Disney point, because we've talked about this before. I think that Marvel has, we use the word marvelized, and part of the problem with the original Justice League movie was that it was trying to make DC, which is more of a darker universe or studio, they tried to fit that mold, or DC into that mold, and
Joss Whedon.
and it's more, I really do think even though we use the word Marvelized, it really is kind of like it was Disney-fied. Like,
yeah, and it really is more Disney than Marvel.
Yeah, and I really like that they leaned into Batman as being a darker figure. And I originally gave it a 4 because I wasn't watching it in a serious environment the first time. I was like, I kind of laughed at some of the slow-mo scenes, like when Batman was walking out of the fire towards Penguin and he was upside down and it took forever, and then he like bends
That's
down.
the one shot that shouldn't be in the film.
Don't
bend down. What are you doing? And then, oh my god! Like, no, you should just cut. You should have him walking towards it. And you cut to the upside down Penguin, like.
Oh yeah,
and then you cut, and then you just leave.
Yeah, there were some weird editing decisions with that whole scene, like with the Batmobile, how slow.
It's like a half second behind. Oh,
yeah,
but the scene was great before that. That was one of my favorite car chase scenes I've ever seen.
Yeah, and then I think the reason they did that was because like Batman hangs upside down, which is just too on the nose. Like I actually think that's what it was, and I really hated it. So
yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry about that one. But
I was laughing when I watched it the first time, but I was able to go a second time and watch it in IMAX and just kind of give it a more charitable and just kind of looked at it as if I tried to take it seriously, and I think that there were so many specific things. I mean, you could tell that most of what happened in this movie was intentional.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 5 the second time.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines as Austin. I'm very loath to rate and kind of give a number to my experience, because it's such an experiential art form, and it's also like, who am I to grade this $200 million budget with all these great actors, but I have been studying film for a few years now, and I think I've kind of distilled my philosophy along the same lines as Austin, where it's like, in service of the story and in service of what you're trying to do, in the same way that you can't compare a film like Interstellar to a film like Toy Story, but both of their aspects, serve the story and the characters and the themes so well that it's, it's very cohesive and it does what it's trying to do. And so I think that's, I'm kind of grading it. My rubric changes depending on what the film is trying to do. If you're watching Ted 2, that's a different film than if you're watching Interstellar or, these things. So it's like the bar is a different set for each of them. And I think, like Austin said, this film set out to do a very unique take, a very gritty, grungy, deeper dive into kind of the psychology, of both the Riddler, which is a very interesting take, as well as they took some risks with the Batman himself. And I think it did exactly what it set out to do. So yeah, full marks for me as well. I think it's wonderful. And also, yeah, you like Austin said, you can follow us on Letterboxd to get some more of our very, very high value opinions, experts over here.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, so you can follow me at Spencer Whitaker on Letterboxd. And yeah, Austin 406 on Letterboxd. And what's yours?
I think it's Michael Liam 58.
Michael Liam 58 on Letterboxd. Yeah.
But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think we're going to try to do a lot more reviews. We promised to do the Wonder Woman 1984 one, and we didn't.
Would be interesting.
We also promised to do the Justice League one, which I know for a fact we will get to. We have to get to that one.
Let us know what you guys want to see too. Like, we watch movies all the time, and that can very much be set up. I know we have a few ideas in the tank. We're doing, some Godfather stuff, kind of throwing it back to some classics soon. So, but if there's anything else that you guys want to see, like, we'll watch it, we'll talk about it, we'll sit down, we'll do it.